Without your love. Without your love.
What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video, and in this video I'm going to be building an awesome $1,500 gaming PC build for 2021. Featuring a Ryzen 5 5600X and AMD 6800 XT, this might just be the ultimate Team Red gaming PC build. I'll be building it inside a lovely case from Corsair and walking you through all of the other components in today's video. Alongside that, I'll also be showing you how to put the system together from start through to finish, showing you guys how you can get hands-on with a system like this in the current climate before testing the machine out in the latest AAA titles and some of the most popular esports games to see the frame rates that we're able to achieve. Let's dive into the build though after a quick ad from today's video sponsor. The Western Digital Black SN850 is a blazing fast Gen 4 NVMe drive that provides supreme performance and killer speeds. With up to 2 terabytes of capacity, you can upgrade your system today with super fast storage. Insane read speeds reach 7,000 megabytes a second, with write speeds in the region of 5,300. That's 5.3 gigabytes every single second. Plus, support for PlayStation 5 means that it isn't just your PC that's ready for the star storage treatment. Check out the full WD Black SN850 range, now available in a heatsink version from eBuy.com, linked in the description below. I'll be walking through each of the components as I actually go ahead and install them, which means our glamorous 6800 XT is going to have to wait for a few minutes because first we're going to install the CPU, motherboard, RAM and the SSD. These components are often referred to as the core components, the parts that are absolutely essential to make any build possible. At the heart of this system is the MSI B550 Tomahawk. This is one of my favourite motherboards on the market, with support for dual channel memory, the latest Ryzen CPUs and Gen 4 NVMe drives. This is an awesome motherboard choice for a system like this one. With an AM4 Plus socket and support for the latest Ryzen processors, room for dual channel memory with up to 4 RAM DIMMs, support for the latest Gen 4 NVMe drives, and some pretty good cooling, it ticks all the major boxes. Plus, it's also got a built-in rear IO shield with 1 gig and 2.5 gigabit Ethernet for super fast networking, and while no Wi-Fi is included on this version of the board, you can get MSI Wi-Fi boards for a small price premium. But as always, I'll link all the options down in the description below. I'll be coupling the motherboard up with the AMD Ryzen 5 5600X. I appreciate I probably sound like a broken record that just can't stop playing the tunes of the AMD 5600X. It's a great CPU with 6 cores, 12 threads, some superb clock speeds, and it basically destroys any of the current 11th generation Intel processors that exist. 12th gen releases, which are rumoured to be happening soon, might of course be a different story, but for now, the 5600X is crucially available from a lot of retailers and an awesome choice. To install this, it literally couldn't be easier. Locate the golden triangle on the processor itself and line this up with the triangle on the top left corner of your motherboard socket. This just gives you the correct orientation for the processor. Once you've got this, drop your Ryzen chip into place. The AMD Ryzen text will kind of be parallel with the right hand side of the socket and secure the arm down. That's your CPU installed and it's super simple. I'll be pairing the CPU up with this RAM kit from T-Force. This is their Nighthawk Gaming, a unique RGB kit that's going to look fantastic today and actually is really quite heavy. This RAM is a nice choice. It's got a unique form factor and quite a cool design that does stand out a little bit from the competition. Plus it's white, which should match nicely with our build's color scheme. I was gonna go for a white motherboard, but the lack of white graphics cards made that a bit of a waste of time. So this is just gonna provide us with some nice white accenting at the very least. In order to install this, find the notch on the memory, which believe it or not is actually slightly off center, and pull back the clips on the 2nd and the 4th RAM DIMM slots. Line your memory up, drop it down, apply a bit of pressure to each side, and that's basically it. Your RAM will install nice and easily. Repeat for as many DIMMs as you've got, and you'll be good to go. We can move on then next to our SSD today. This was kindly sent over by this video's sponsor, Western Digital, and it's a great Gen 4 NVMe drive. With speeds in the region of 7 gigabytes a second, at least on the read side of the equation, and a built-in heatsink, it's gonna work great. It's also compatible with PlayStation 5 and comes in at some really competitive price points when you consider just how quick it is. To give you an idea of speed, this is about 12 times quicker than the fastest SATA SSDs these from just a few years back. Our speed test will be on your screen now though, as well as a web review over on GeekaWhat.com, which you can read in the card section or linked in the description below. This heatsink will do a great job of keeping the drive nice and cool, something that's important for Gen 4 SSDs, which do get a bit quicker given how powerful the components are. To install this, we need to locate this slot on the motherboard, just below our CPU. So we've got our silver sort of end plate, and then we've got the screw which we'll use to fasten the drive down. For this step, you'll need to throw out your Phillips head screwdriver and grab a teeny tiny little screwdriver like this one. We can use this to remove the SSD screw before sliding the drive in and using the same screw we just took out to fasten the SSD in. Once that's done, your CPU, RAM, motherboard and storage are all basically complete, allowing us to move on to the case and the cooler. Speaking of which, this is the combo I've gone for. Corsair's iCUE 4000X is one of my favourite cases of the year. It's ATX, great value, has tempered glass everywhere and comes with 3 RGB fans up front as standard. Plenty of dust filters and some of the best build quality I've seen on a case in a while, making a fantastic all-rounder. USB-C, a nice design, Corsair iCUE, the list of benefits goes on and on and on.
1 hour later.
And on and on.
2 hours later.
And on and on. Anyway, the cooler I'll be pairing this up with is Corsair's H150i Elite Capellix. Now, I'll be the first to admit, the cooler's maybe a tiny bit overkill for the build. You could drop down to a 240mm or even like an air cooler, something like the Corsair AS500, which I surprised one of my editors with in a PC build earlier in the year. Go and check that video out. It's definitely underrated for what it was. Now, taking the case out of the box is never a particularly glamorous affair, but let's give this a go. Nice, I think I did a pretty good job of that one. Now with any case, I always recommend taking off the side panels before you begin. Of course, you need to take this one off to actually install any components, but taking off the front and the rear panels and any dust filters just makes the case feel a little bit more accessible. You can then identify each of the standoffs. So for us, we've got 3 at the top, 3 across the middle, and 3 along the bottom. Quite handily, this perfectly lines up with our motherboard, where we also have 3 along the top, 3 across the middle, and 3 along the bottom. Make sure the standoffs are in the right place and just give yourself some time to double or triple check this, as a standoff in the wrong place can make contact with the motherboard, cause shorting, and basically damage hardware, something you don't want to happen. This motherboard also has a built-in rear I/O shield, meaning we haven't got to clip that in, and allows us to basically just drop the board in. So we slide the board into place with the I/O shield poking out the back of the case, line it up over those standoffs, and the center standoff, which is actually slightly raised, will hold it into place at least for the time being. That makes installing and actually screwing the motherboard in a lot easier. You can see as well that it fits perfectly, the RAM matches up nicely, and it's a really simple process. You take your time and just go through it step by step. Fasten each of the screws down, as I say, 3 at the top, 3 across the middle, and 3 along the bottom, and then we can go ahead and look at the CPU cooler. In order to pop this H150i into place, we need to actually remove the fans at the front of the chassis to begin with. What we can actually do here is use these 3 RGB fans and either have a push-pull orientation as far as airflow goes, or relocate them to the top and the back of the case, something I think I'm going to do to decrease temperatures and also give us an aesthetic edge. It will mean we have 3 RGB fans up front, 2 at the top and 1 at the rear. You may want to grab yourself out an electric screwdriver if you've got one for this stage. If not, a standard one will suffice. It's just quite a time-consuming process. Pop off the glass front panel and that will then reveal your dust filter, which you can then easily remove as well before actually taking out each of the fans. Once you've taken the fans out, you can go ahead and pop the radiator in with these white fans instead, which I think will just look a little bit better at the front of the case. You'll also want to use these long screws to go through the radiator and the fan all in one go once you've actually gone ahead and removed these 3 from the front. The white radiator matches the theme perfectly today and will secure nicely at the front of the chassis. I don't believe we should have any GPU clearance issues either, though we will check that a little bit later on when we go ahead and install the graphics card. As I say, with this process, it's all about just taking it step by step. Take out the front fans, then pop your radiator in, and we'll look at the water block in a moment. As I say, with this part of the process, it's all about being patient. Take out those front fans, pop the new radiator into place, and relocate them to the top of the chassis and to the back, using the same screws you got when you removed them. What you then need to do is just go ahead and grab these little brackets that come included with these D-shaped sort of clips with the cooler, and pop these on both the top and the bottom of the water block. They clip in nice and easily, and are what we'll be using to fasten it down around the Ryzen processor. If you take a look at the mounting hardware around the Ryzen CPU itself, you'll see we've got these black plastic clips with a notch on each side. These notches are what we're going to to use with our D brackets to actually fasten the cooler in. You will want to pop a dab of thermal paste on your cooler as well if you've used it before or if it doesn't come with some pre-applied, before fastening the cooler carefully into place. For this, I have just flipped the case down on its back to make things a bit easier and make sure we're not fighting gravity when we go ahead and install the water block. That's looking pretty good, I'm liking it, but not nearly as good as what our graphics card's going to look like once that's installed. Now, we will be the first to admit that the builds here on the channel have been quite Nvidia centric as of late. That's mainly because Nvidia cards are easier for not only us but also you guys to get hold of. But hopefully with Ethereum changing its mining structures at the beginning of December, that could be about to change. And that's where the AMD Radeon 6800 XT comes in. Now that AMD have their answer to Nvidia's DLSS through Fidelity FX Super Effects, or Fidelity Super Effects, something along those lines, they've become a lot more competitive in some of the most popular games out there. This is the Gaming X Trio version from MSI. It provides a fantastic cooler that goes ahead to rival the likes of the Asus Strix card. It sits just below the Supreme, often found on like their 3080 Ti for example, but still gives you great cooling, lots of RGB, and a really solid feature set. I am a little bit concerned about GPU clearance. This case is pretty good, but with our push-pull rad at the front, we might have squeezed out a little bit of space. So let's just go ahead and see how much luck we're going to have in today's video. Aesthetically though, this thing is super nice. RGB light bar at the top, a really solid backplate. It actually fits quite well into sort of a 2.5 slot form factor with these 3 large fans that give great factory overclock speeds, even more overclocking headroom, and some really solid temperatures. Take off the protective PCIe cover here, and then we're going to install it into our top PCIe slot. In one of those here's what I prepared earlier moments, I've gone ahead and just removed the 2 rear PCIe covers as well, allowing us to install the GPU, which hopefully is going to fit in the case. Moment of truth time. Here we go. Okay, that's looking pretty positive so far. Oh, easy. There's loads of room. It could have been even bigger than this. There we go. Slide it in, clip it into place. That is a perfect fit. Now, we probably, well, you couldn't do push-pull on our radiator, so you couldn't put more fans at the rear, but with our 2 exhausts at the top, whoa, our 2 exhausts at the top and the exhaust at the back, which will illuminate our case quite nicely. I think it's looking pretty good. This graphics card just needs a pair of 8-pin power connectors, but we'll deal with the cables and wiring in a second. First, we need to fasten the GPU down with a couple of screws to make sure it's not going to flop about and go anywhere. After all, it is quite a hefty boy. As far as cables and wiring goes, this is what I've opted to use. This is Corsair's CX750F. It's kind of a take on their old CX750M. It's still modular, but now they do a white version. It's got an RGB fan, and it is fully modular rather than semi-modular. That means you only plug in the cables you need. Now, as a word of warning, this video won't be a full cables and wiring guide, but we have got one of those on the channel, which you can check out at the video in the cards now or down in the description below for mobile users. That video should cover off all of the bases nicely and give you a good idea for this system of how to go ahead and plug these in. I'm going to go ahead and plug these up though in a little time lapse before jumping into a montage of how good this system looks when it's all powered up with all of those Corsair iCUE RGBs nicely in sync. Once we've done that, we can go ahead and look at performance, but first, roll that montage.
Without your love.
Now that we've seen how good this system looks when it's all powered up, what about performance? Well, the 6800 XT is a really strong card, as you can see from the summary numbers on your screen now. This gives you a quick rundown of all the different games that we tested out, from AAA titles to older, popular esports games too. We'll be taking a deeper dive title by title in a second, but I like this overview, as it gives us a good indication of where the 6800 XT sits. The first of those focus titles is GTA 5. Here we got an average of 128 frames per second at 1440p high, tested using the game's inbuilt benchmarking mode. It was pretty lag free, no stuttering, no screen tearing particularly, and the game looked visually great. Watchdogs Legion is a similar story. At 1440p high with no ray tracing enabled, we got an average of 120 frames per second, with 90 and 99th percentile results, which didn't really waver too much from this level. Sadly, with ray tracing enabled, it was a different story, and the frame rate plummeted to 50 frames per second. So stick with ray tracing off, especially if you're building an AMD system, at least for the time being. What about something like Call of Duty's Black Ops Cold War? Well, once again at 1440p high settings with ray tracing disabled, we got 155 frames per second on average. So once again, some really strong results here. The game looked great, no lag, no stuttering, no screen tearing, and while the ray tracing results were significantly worse at 66 frames per second, the straight rasterization was really solid. What about something like Apex Legends though? It's overtaken Warzone recently in popularity, but does this system have the cojones, as they would say, to actually match up with that reputation? To actually perform in the way we need it to? Well, I'm glad to report that it does. At 189 frames per second on average, the game looked great. This is high settings, remember, and we're still achieving esports level frame rates. Talking of esports level frame rates, it brings us on nicely to the next game today, Valorant. Here at 1440p high settings, we got just shy of 400 frames per second, 385 FPS on average, some really incredible results. The 90 and 99th percentile results were in the same region, all above 300 frames, meaning the frame rate didn't really fluctuate pretty much at all. But what about Cyberpunk? One of the most difficult games to run on the market right now, and definitely the most strenuous on the list today. It's also quite poorly optimized, but more on that in another video. Here we got an average of 108 frames per second, no ray tracing or anything like that, but that's the way I'd recommend you run the title anyway. This was at medium to high settings, 1440p. Moving on to Fortnite next up, here we ran at 1080p competitive settings, and achieved over 200 frames per second on average. Fortnite is a game where AMD's straight rasterization approach really works well, and as you can see here, the frame rate was solid. But here's a bit of a curveball. What about Fortnite at 1080p high settings? Some of you are going to be in disbelief, James, we don't want to play at high settings. Well, you only lose just over 30 FPS, jumping you down to 171. So definitely consider Fortnite at higher settings if you're on an AMD GPU. Finally then, the last game today is Call of Duty's Warzone. Not quite as popular anymore, but still pretty highly played, and here we got over 100 frames per second at 132 FPS on average. 90 and 99th percentile results were strong as well, showing not too much by way of frame rate fluctuation, so that's pretty good. And with that, that pretty much wraps it up for today's video. If you did enjoy it, give it a big old like rating, make sure to get subscribed. Thanks for watching though, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.